Okay, well, this I'm hoping is going to be a tremendous 45 minutes. As most of you know, my name is Ian Rowe, and when I started my first job, gosh, almost 30 years ago with Arthur Andersen, I was one of the few black staff consultants. And very high intensity environment, very competitive, and I spent time with my fellow black colleagues, because there weren't that many of us. It was always interesting that we got into these conversations where several of my colleagues felt questioned why they were there. You know, they were uncertain of whether or not they'd really earned their place. It was just this fascinating phenomenon. I didn't really understand it. And I noticed it with many of my black colleagues. There was always this question of our identity and just, were we up to the task? And someone shared a copy of this book, The Content of Our Character. And I could read many passages from this book, but one of them says, we as black people have a victim-focused identity that is at war with our own best interests, that magnifies our oppression and diminishes our sense of possibility. I think this identity is a weight on blacks because it is built around our collective insecurity rather than our faith in our human capacity to seize opportunity as individuals. Like when I read those words, these words exploded off the page. Like someone had the courage to say these words in public. He gave me a vocabulary to think differently about what it meant to be a black person. And so it is with deep humility that I am now sitting on the stage with the person who wrote those words, Shelby Steele.
Thank you. Thank you. I'm ready to go now.
You're ready to go? All right. Okay. So Shelby, let's actually step back, because you have been a force for good for so many people in this room, and you've been the tip of the spear. You've had to take a lot of arrows and accusations over years and years. You don't admit that systemic racism exists. You said even last night oppression is over. But let's go back even to your early years and the experiences that you had as a young person going to schools. I've heard you describe the kinds of systemic racism that you faced in your own life, particularly in schools. Talk a little bit about that and how your parents responded and how that's helped to shape your own worldview.
Wow, small question.
You're a big thinker.
Well, I was blessed with two really, truly great parents, my mother and father, and everything I am, I clearly owe to them. They got married in 1944. They had met as founding members of CORE, Congress of Racial Equality. I grew up as a CORE baby.
A CORE baby.
A little community of people who were members of CORE and so forth. So I grew up with the consciousness of civil rights and racial equality, and I like to say I was born right smack into it. My mother, who was white and had a master's degree from the University of Chicago. My father had a third grade education. He was from the Deep South. They were probably the most romantic couple I've ever been around. But when my mother was ready to deliver, she he took her to the hospital and wheeled her out, and they brought out a wheelchair and wheeled her, and they took her and they were going to put her in a room where she was to give birth. So my father then goes out, park the car, and comes back in and says, my wife is just here. Could you tell me?
Oh my God, I think I know where this is going.
And they said nothing, but they made some phone calls immediately. Immediately, my mother was taken from the 9th floor to the basement, where black women gave birth, and the only place they were allowed to give birth. And that's where I was born, into this interesting dilemma. They fought their entire life for civil rights. They were activists. Almost every night there were meetings in the house. They integrated a church that was all white. They went and visited it, and they were rejected. The minister resigned, took half the congregation with him, and they created a new first integrated church in Chicago area. I went to school, and the school was segregated. There were 2 schools in one district. One was white, one was black. They organized the parents for a boycott of the school. People took all their children out, and finally half the faculty was fired, and the school was completely changed, reformed. But it was a school that was before that, all white teachers who got their jobs when they had breakdowns, and and so they would then be sent to the black school to teach, and so I couldn't read in the 6th grade, and my parents stopped that. The whole community took their kids out and demanded. So anyway, that's my. By the time I got to high school, I was a veteran of marches and civil rights and so forth.
Wow. When you face that kind of discrimination, I can't even believe, that's the first time I've heard you share that story, that you were born presumably because you were a mixed race baby. Mm-hmm. They felt they had to have you be born only. But when you face that kind of evil,
threw me into an identity crisis.
Right from the bat. But people respond in different ways. You can respond to that kind of experience and develop a deep sense of hate and resentment for a country or a system that is perpetrating that. Or it seems you can respond in the way that you and your parents did, which was to try to liberate ourselves from that system. What made the difference? How does that happen? To explain how you didn't fall into a negative spiral.
Well, I think a lot of it had to do, I think, with faith. They believed in a Christ that was good, was positive, believed in humanity, and they believed in humanity, and it sustained them and their friends, the community of people they were around, reinforced that. So my parents were happy people. I never saw any darkness. They were happy.
Wow.
And I was. Segregation kind of just, it was sort of quirky and funny to me as a kid. And I would even ask people, why I have to stand on this side of the door jamb to get a Coke? I can't go 3 inches over into the actual store. Zapchink's Grocery, it was down the corner. And I would wear him out.
You'd wear them out.
Yeah. And I learned to to give no quarter they were activists, and it was not about apologizing and mollifying people. It was about standing for what was right, what was and so forth. And my parents expected that of their kids.
So did you feel, when you now started to become part of the civil rights movement itself, did you feel you were now part of a group of kindred spirits that thought the way that you did, or did you start to sense?
I knew nothing else. That was what I knew, and I had a happy childhood. I was the people that were in that founding members of CORE and the little community in South Chicago, and it was just they were wonderful people. They were all people who believed in the rightness of their cause. They had no doubt, and they acted on that.
And did that shift over time? Where did the movement start to take a different direction?
The movement started to take a different direction. I was going to talk a lot about that, but I'll pass it up for the while. It started to take a different direction when it was clear that blacks were going to be a free people, and that we were going to, the '64 Civil Rights Act made it against the law to discriminate. It was a true liberation, a true proclamation, and at that time, it's what I call the shock of freedom. We experienced this supported by law, our freedom. And it was so radical, actually, in terms culturally, that people didn't really admit it for a long time. I don't think people admit today. You want to make a lot of black people angry, tell them they're free.
Well, you say what you said, right. Well, last night, for those that were here, you made a statement that said black people are no longer oppressed.
Right.
And you may have noticed in the room, there was a moment of silence. I think because people weren't sure how to respond. Is that true? So I want to dive deeper into that statement. But you said this idea that people who've been once enslaved, even once freed, reinvent their oppression.
Yes.
Talk about that. What is now that the physical shackle symbolically is gone, but you're saying the mental shackle stays on?
Right. The first thing I think, the first thing people do when they are in fact free is deny that they are free. Denial is the first response to freedom. Not me. You're crazy. I was abused, yes, but I'm not free. Because freedom becomes an extremely threatening situation. It means you have to be responsible entirely now for your life and for the kind of person you are and for what you pursue in life. And when you have been oppressed for 4 centuries, you don't have the habit of that kind of self-examination. How could you? You had to adapt to limitations. You had to figure your way around impossible situations just to have the slightest dignity. All of a sudden now, you have the freedom and you have this awesome responsibility, so that I look at you and I say, whatever your life is, you did it. Your fate was in your hands. And I began to realize it took a long time for me to get to that place. But I finally discovered, probably not that long ago, I'm actually free. I'm actually
What was that?
I am a
Was there a
free
moment?
man.
Was there a moment that
There was
occurred?
a kind of a moment, yeah.
What was that
It was
moment?
creeping up on me, I realized, for a long time. But whoa, I can do anything I want. I don't have any excuses, really. This book I'm trying to write that's driving me crazy, I could throw it out. I could get deeper into it. Everything is you have to make. I have to find a way to commit myself to things in life and become, take responsibility for the decisions that I make, and that's scary and difficult. Well, you have a whole race of people put in that position where they're forced to finally do that. We were adapted to oppression. We learned to survive it. We were masters at it. Art forms came out of it. You listen to jazz, you hear improvisations that, where people are sort of reinventing themselves. Well, all of a sudden, you don't have to do it. This is one of the real differences between white and black people. White people are born into freedom, and more is asked of them. Whereas born into oppression, the mother thinks her real first responsibility is to protect her children from humiliation. And so she tamps down their ambition. She tightens down their spirit, and they live within the boundaries.
Wow. So do you think it's reasonable then that, as you say, most black people can't handle our freedom if there is this?
Freedom is our problem is not remotely racism. Our problem is freedom. Way bigger than racism. Racism is a joke compared to freedom. If you look at most of what we do, and you understand it's driven by this anxiety. Look at what happened the moment they passed the '64 Civil Rights Bill. Within months, Stokely Carmichael was screaming, "Black power." We just won the Civil Rights Bill, for goodness sakes. No, black power. The idea that your identity is your power. We just had won a civil rights revolution saying, no, we're citizens of a democracy. We have freedom, that's our power. We didn't have faith in that. It scared the hell out of us. It was a challenge. So right away we grab identity. And we make a big deal about being black. And being black is, my hair was out to here. I wore an African dashiki.
So you bought into it. So you bought into it. That was a source of pride.
Yeah, I absolutely.
So what's wrong with that?
And I remember my parents, who for the first time would look at me a little anxious. My father would say, "What's the word identity? What do you mean by what's that? Why can't you just be a citizen? I mean, what does race got to do with it?" Well, we black people had begun to use race to hide out from the challenges of freedom.
Wow. Okay, all right. So the flip side of black power is what I think you call white guilt.
Yes.
Or it's certainly a source of black power in your... So talk about how that presumably victim-focused identity, as you are describing, led to a sort of reckoning for how the white community was now dealing with the history of our country and their role in it.
Well, the white community, I think, in America in the 60s, and again, the civil rights movement was, building all the way up to, I think its crescendo was that civil rights bill. But whites were more and more asking themselves how they, what racism really was about. Were they racist? Were they evil? Was it? When I was growing up, whites had absolute confidence about racism. They would say to me, a lot of them would befriend me. I had an English teacher who was sweet as she could be. She would say, now Shelby, you're the only black in the class. They're going to blame you for this and blame you for that. In other words, she would coach me on how to live, how to adapt to a racist society. And thinking, I'm sure, that she was doing a wonderful thing. And in many ways she was, because that's what the society was. All of a sudden in the 60s, we told that woman she was a racist. She'd be a virulent racist today. Well, again, we made identity the thing, and whites then also had a separate burden. How do you live with arguably the most disgraceful human act of sustained man's inhumanity to man imaginable in slavery and Jim Crow and segregation and so forth. And I remember all that vividly. I was old enough to really experience it and on a daily basis. We were telling white people that they had practiced a monumental evil. They've been under the hammer ever since.
Yes. Tell me about the power of wielding the ability to call someone a racist.
Yeah, it's to a people who just 5 minutes ago were impotent, couldn't call anything to account, couldn't stop any form of abuse. All of a sudden, we had the first white guilt is our first experience of power
and freedom
in our democracy, in our society. The problem with most social reform is that it's more designed to take white people, give them relief from this charge of racism, than it is into the development of black people. So we get a war on poverty, we get all these programs, but they're all for whites. We say they're for blacks, but they're all for whites. Who whites say, what do you want? We're giving you this, we're giving you that, so forth and so on, and you owe us. And then we develop, again, this grievance elite, which says, I'm here to collect. I'm here to collect. And that's our symbiotic bond. That's our connection to each other. And it's tragic.
I mean, when you talk about the grievance elite, you often talk about white guilt. I'm curious what you think about black guilt. One of the things I'm often struck by are black people in our country that are quite successful, who have embraced the principles of strong family, faith, strong education, entrepreneurship. They've actually leveraged the pillars of our country that have led to prosperity, and yet they're often the ones maybe saying defund the police, even though they don't live in communities in which they would want the police defunded. But it potentially almost is a way to make your authenticity as a black person more real. So do you see that? Is there a phenomenon of black guilt that is also as powerful as white guilt?
That's a good question. I don't think so. I don't think I don't think we feel we have a collective guilt as whites do. And in the case of whites, it's enforced with stigma, with stigmatization. And we'll call it, look, if you're in a university today and you get you say some word that is the faintest bit off color, then you pay for it.
Yes.
We whites live under an oppressive threat of stigma that I think we completely underestimate the power of it. Drives our culture and our whole way of seeing ourselves as people, and it completely defines the political left in America. All that comes out of race, and our moral sense comes out of race. And, well, I'm going to go down the wrong road there. Let me take a quick aside. I'll try to get back, push me back.
Yep.
We won the civil rights movement because we tied to political power a demand for morality. What Martin Luther King stood for is morality. He was a Christian. He believed in a Christ. He believed in good versus evil. And we had kept that completely out of the story, out of politics, certainly out of race relations. Nothing to do with this. We just God wanted us all to be with our own kind, and there was nothing immoral. King made one point, and President Kennedy was the first to sort of say it, that racism is immoral. If you are racist, if you don't like black people, you're an immoral person. You're in league with evil. That took over the whole country. That won us our freedom. Our attachment of morality to we put your morality at stake. If you keep oppressing us, then you are evil. You are at odds with God. And we won. We just won like bam, like that in the 60s when that really came to the full. I think in many ways it's wonderful, but in many ways it's terrible because we still are grappling now with this connection of our political needs, our needs as a people, is still tied to morality. So people still think of race as essentially a moral issue. Our problem as blacks is not immorality. Our problem as blacks is underdevelopment. We are not, 4 centuries of oppression kind of slows down your development. Mm-hmm. And that's where we suffer. We don't suffer from a lack of freedom. We don't suffer from immorality. We suffer from this idea that everything has to be moral and judging ourselves that way. One of the things I like about conservatism is that it's that way too, but it's not as strictly that way as requiring moral testimony and so forth.
I'm struck by this idea that you, at some point in your life, you had this epiphany moment that you realized that you were free, mm-hmm. right? Despite all of these issues. And last night when you said that one of the points of progress we've made is because of the Civil Rights Act and this other legislation, we are no longer oppressed. So I'm very curious, if I were to ask everyone in this room to raise their hands, are black people still oppressed in this country? Hands raised. Yes, if you raise your hand, the answer is yes. Well, we had 2 hands raised. That's very interesting. If this had been a meeting of the NAACP, what do you think the reaction would be? How fast would those hands have gone up?
You and I would be, way down the street. So this is just intolerable. The idea that we're free to the American left, because their whole innocence is built on the idea on the opposite, on the fact that we're oppressed. They have no other source of power beyond it is necessary for blacks to be oppressed and angry about it. If you don't have angry blacks then you don't have any in your corner. You don't have any power in American life.
So,
The biggest problem we were talking about the Republican Party. The Republican Party can't get angry blacks. If you could get angry blacks, you'd win every election. Yeah. Well, who got Mr. Biden elected?
that's
Angry blacks. Mr. Clyburn and so forth redeemed his weak candidacy by bringing in blacks. Go in South Carolina, where he won, his campaign came back to life. We thank Mr. Angry Blacks for Mr. Biden.
yes. So doesn't this, though, highlight our central challenge, even the central challenge of our conference, which is that in a room like this, when I ask that question, only 2 hands say that black people in this country are oppressed, but we have a high degree of confidence if we went into a different room with a predominantly large number of black people, the hands wouldn't go up fast enough. So what is it that we need to do to have the ideas that are so agreed upon in this room transcend?
Courage. Right back at you. There is no, I don't believe in magic. There's no magic bullets, there's no tricks, there's no schemes or public policy that is going to do it. I strongly feel that people have to want it. People have to really, truly want it to sacrifice for it. As long as they don't really want it, they'll continue to suffer. The suffering will have, maybe it will focus people. But we spend all of our time, we shoot down. You and I have been shot down how many times? It's a constant.
A few times yesterday, then Wednesday a couple times.
We're in a tough spot. Again, it's a symbiosis. We each need each other, or think we do. And so if Steele says he's a free man, then I can't count on him. It means he's of no value to me. If he's saying he's a victim, he's suffering indirectly because of his race, then I can turn that into something. I can make some hay.
Yep. Well, I could continue to dominate the questioning, but we have an opportunity to open up floor for anyone that might have a question for Shelby. Okay, well, I'll come to you. Bob, I'll come to you second.
To be honest, I think I'm in the middle in regards to oppression. Because in a literal sense, you would say, no, we're not oppressed. But when you identify some of the other things that are put far as a restriction on African Americans or black people, would you say that there is a gray area there? Because to get to the point where you feel that you're completely free, the mindset of the black people are thinking, I'm not completely free because of A, B, C, and D. And I am oppressed because of A, B, C, and D, which of course, like you said, is a mind transformation. But what are those things that are dictating the mindset to continue, to not die? So what are some of those things?
Fear. It's, though one of the aspects of this I call this the shock of freedom that we are suffering from. The first thing you do is you deny that you are free. And the second thing you do is to reinvent, which means create some narrative which shows you, well, see over there, that's where I'm not free. There's racism right over there. In other words, all of our focus, thinking, concentrating, is designed to keep alive racism. So I'm saying, go crazy and say, there's no racism. Now what? What would you do if there's no racism? Then my advice would be, do it. Go there. That's how we're going to get ahead. Yeah. That's the only way. And so if there's still racism, everybody knows there is still racism in the world. Bigotry, prejudice, so forth. There always will be. And it's always going to be evil and bad and so forth. I'm going to let that stop me. I only got one life. I'm going to let that stop me? There's just no, it's an existential circumstance. Life is choice. And we have to, again, that's a mark of oppression to not understand that. You look at a figure like Elon Musk. That's an American. That's whether you agree with him or whether you don't agree with him, that's it. You take it. You take freedom. And you try it and it doesn't work, you take it again, you keep on. And at some point you get the United States of America, the greatest, freest country that ever lived, that ever existed. So when people say, but there's racism over here, or there's some back there behind that guy right there, he's not showing it. But
Go for it.
I got one question.
Adrian and then Bob Woodson.
Thanks, Ian. Thomas Sowell talks about it in White Liberals and Black Rednecks. He talks about a cracker culture that explains part of black culture. And you have a completely or somewhat different take on it, that it's more of a, as you said, 400 years of oppression that results in almost a mindset that colors your view of the world. Mm-hmm. Can you just talk about how those are two different views of culture and how you see Sowell's versus yours?
I'm not sure. Say a little more. I'm not sure I get the difference.
Well, I think there's a difference in that he's trying to find a root of black culture that was adopted from whites a long time ago, whereas yours is much more of a psychological explanation.
Yes. Yes. The most interesting area for me is the psychology of oppression, and it seems to me we don't like to talk about it, and it makes everybody nervous. But I think that's what we talk. So we talk about everything else but that, and that. I could tell you a story if you give me 2 or 3 minutes, just a story that makes the point, I think. This is a story written by Albert Camus, the French writer, French-Algerian writer. It's called The Guest, if you want interested in reading it. And it's a story of it's set in Algeria in the 50s. There's a revolution against the French and who occupy the country and have made it a colony. And this is a story of a man, a teacher named Daru, who lives out in the desert and runs a school for Arab kids, and is quote the archetypal white liberal. And he's out there alone doing this work. One day, they have to bring prisoners to go through his school property before they go down off the plateau into the city to prison. He's tired of this. He feels he's facilitating colonialism and the oppression of the Arab people. So they drop off a prisoner one day, and the prisoner and Daru is like, I don't even want to talk to this guy. I don't want to filthy my hands with this. I'm holding this man captive. They spend the night sleeping in the classroom, very nervous, but talking to each other as human beings. The next morning they wake up, and the people who were supposed to come and march this guy down the plateau to prison don't show up. So Daru says, that's it. I've had it. He makes up a package of food. He takes 1,000 francs, which is considered a nice piece of money, and he walks the Arab out to the rim of the plateau, and he says, the road there goes back to your people. They'll take you in and hide you from the French. The road in this direction will take you to prison. They're waiting for you. Here's the food, and here's the money. You are free. The Arab looks at him like completely panic-stricken. He starts to implore Daru to not set him free. Please, he begs. But Daru really had it. He looks at him and he says, I'm leaving now. Turns his back and he walks away. And he walks to the other end of the plateau, and finally his curiosity gets to him. He stops, he looks back, and way off in the distance, he sees this hunched over figure walking down the road to prison. The end of the story. Well, I think that we black Americans are that Arab. We have just, we don't know what to do with freedom. We've hated it, we've tried everything. Hate each other, hate people, black conservatives. Maybe if we hate them in the right way, we can really, that'll work. Well, maybe we just have to play all this out. I don't know. But I know much of what we do as a people at this moment is driven by fear. And America has put packages of food and money in our hands constantly. And we still are stopped by our anxiety over freedom. Our inability to imagine ourselves finally as what would it like to be free, well, we are free. We are free now, and it's a gift from God. But what we do, look at why this group exists. It exists because black people are afraid of us, afraid of this group, and afraid that you're going to really actually treat them as free people. So we're happy to be together, to assuage some of that anxiety and so forth. So what I feel again is with a group like this is like all important, and we should be unapologetic and rage forward. And we're going to have to be critical of our own people, black people. We're going to have to be really critical. White people, at some point, if they want to be free, they're going to have to do the same thing. And they do have an advantage. They do have experience, much more experience with freedom than we do, and know how it works. And that's what I want. My father used to tell me when I come home from college, and I'd say I couldn't stand it, and blah, blah, blah. And he would say, you be a pirate. You take everything you can get. Take everything you can get. Let them call you the N-word, all whatever. You take everything you can get. He came around before Black Power. So.
Well, Bob, I believe, has the last question. But Shelby, we are determined to not have that Arab go down the path to prison. Yeah. Everyone in this room is determined to get an Uber to get that person to go the other way. Bob.
Shelby, I am of your generation, but I must say I have a slight dissent from your analysis. I believe that, I think it was...
Well, it's because you're Uncle Tom.
Huh?
Oh.
That's right. But no, I agree with you that, as you said, if you condition people to enter the back door, even if there isn't one, they'll demand that you build one. And that comes, so I totally agree with that. But I also think that part of living free is tied to your identity. And we came out of the civil rights movement with an identity crisis within our group over skin color. There were deep divisions within our whole sororities and fraternities and whatnot were based upon your skin color. There were places in the black community you couldn't get in if you looked like me and Eon. And so we have to acknowledge, and so what the Black Power movement at least did, and I was a part of both, it did address the issue of identity to say that you should be proud of who. You don't have to straighten your hair.
That's true.
And so I think the Black Power movement served a useful purpose of destroying these bifurcations that existed within our community so that we could live free. Mm-hmm. And also Marcus Garvey was driven out of the country by the civil rights leaders because he was a champion of blacks of deep skin color. And so I think it's important when we're discussing this to tell a complete story. And I wouldn't decry the whole issue of identity. Identity determines how you walk through the door. And finally, I would say that I am, to deal with white guilt, I have become a self-certified racial exorcist. All you white folks, you're absolved of slavery. You're absolved of Jim Crow. I'm thinking about charging $50. I'm going to get in on the race hustle, too.
Well, you're going to pass the plate now, right?
Yeah, exactly.
I'm going to pass the plate. That's right. My little $50.
Okay, so on that note, we are going to come to a close, and I will actually close by reading the closing words of the content of our character.
Wow.
We are on the other side of Martin Luther King's mountaintop, on the downward slope toward the valley that he saw. This is something we ought to know. But what we must know even more than this is that nothing on this earth can be promised but a chance. The promised land guarantees nothing. It is only an opportunity, not a deliverance. Shelby Steele.
Thank you.